Chele Farley is running for U.S. Senate against Senator Gillibrand, and she's endorsed by the Republican, Conservative, and Reform parties. And she's currently working at Mistral.
Oh, this is my only job.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a full-time job, so that's all I'm doing.
And she wears many hats, as you will hear. But without further ado, here's Chele Farley.
Thank you all, and thank you, Phil Orenstein, and all of the members of the Queens Village Republican Club who are here tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak. It has been really a privilege to get to know so many of you, and for the great support you've all had for my campaign. As Republicans, we share a very proud history. We, of course, are the party of Lincoln. We're also the party of Reagan. And we are the party that joined together to elect George Pataki to 3 terms as governor of the Empire State. And we are the party that is going to ensure that we grow our majority in the U.S. Senate. I am honored to be the nominee of the Republican, the Conservative, and the Reform parties here in New York for U.S. Senate. But I am not a career politician. As I have traveled from one end of the state to the other, from big city to small town, I've been listening to voters' concerns. The need for real reform is unmistakable. Too many in Washington are walled off from the real world in which you and I live. They're making laws and spending our money with no consequences or accountability. You can probably guess who I have in mind: career politician, U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. But come November, with your help, Kirsten Gillibrand will be ex-senator. For my entire life, people have been telling me that my goals were too large, my expectations were too lofty, and time again, I have proven them wrong. Growing up, when other girls were joining the Girl Scouts and cheerleading, I was on the math team, which wasn't a great surprise because my father is an actual rocket scientist. You know, when he didn't have a son, he decided to raise me just the same, and I thank him for that every day. I went to Stanford University thanks to my mother. She'd grown up in California, and it had been her dream to attend Stanford. She got in, but couldn't afford to go, so she went to a local college. She was never more proud than the day when I was accepted and was able to attend. At Stanford, while I was getting bachelor's and master's degrees in industrial engineering, Kirsten Gillibrand was also in California, attending UCLA Law School. She was learning how to sue people while I was learning how to build things. After college, I knew that I wanted to live and work in the greatest city in the world. I got a job in finance, moved to New York City, and have happily called this city my home for the last 25 years. 5 years ago, I started dating and then married a wonderful man, a lawyer, but hey, nobody's perfect. He came with 3 great sons who range in age from 11 to 18, and they live with us full time. Many people thought that would be tough, and frankly, sometimes it is. But I know that they really need me, and I can make a real difference in their lives. My middle son, Connor, is severely autistic. He needs round-the-clock supervision. One of the reasons I am running for U.S. Senate is to help special needs families and special needs children, because they really need an advocate fighting for them in Washington. I have never been, thank you. I have never been afraid of a challenge or hard work, and I never will be. I've traveled from one end of the state to the other, meeting with people who want to change the direction of our state and our country. They are appalled and disappointed at the general chaos in Washington, as evidenced by not one but two recent government shutdowns. The relentless obstruction by the Democrats and the shameful grandstanding, political opportunism, and overall ineffectiveness of Kirsten Gillibrand. I am running to restore their faith in government, and I am running to win. From conservative judges to healthcare reform and rebuilding our country's infrastructure, this is our time to transform America and make a long-term difference. Unlike Senator Gillibrand, I will never forget that the first job of a United States Senator is to represent the needs of their state. After the summer of hell for subway and rail commuters here in the metropolitan area, I will bring back to New York the funding we need to fix the system. So where will we get the money to fix it? As I've talked to voters across the state, they have been shocked to learn that New York taxpayers send $40 billion more to Washington than we get back. That's right, $40 billion every year. That's not fair. We are bearing the brunt of the failure of our United States senators to bring back what we deserve. I will stand up and stop Washington from discriminating against New York. So why do I want to run? I have 40 billion reasons why. In every corner of our state, deteriorating roads and dilapidated bridges are jeopardizing public safety. They're hindering economic growth, and worst of all, they are costing property taxpayers billions of dollars as the cost of those repairs is being passed down to the local level. Who better than an engineer to know what needs to be fixed and a finance person to figure out how to do it economically? It is clear that Kirsten Gillibrand has become a creature of Washington. She supported the Iran nuclear deal, which will all but guarantee that Iran becomes a nuclear power in the relatively near future. She's turned her back on Israel and embraced efforts to undermine and delegitimize Israel's very existence. And she has failed to support the president's strong stand against North Korean aggression. The problems New York faces will only get worse as long as we rely on the same politicians who created them. Kirsten Gillibrand's greatest success is self-promotion, not accomplishment. What has she actually done for New York? Whether it's job creation, tax relief, or public safety, the answer is, say it with me, nothing. It's a fair question to ask. Can we win? She'll be well funded. She'll be assisted by much of the liberal media only too willing to help facilitate her attacks on the president. And all while she is trying to raise her national profile for her own presidential bid in 2020. Look, I understand the difficulty of the challenge, but we will win because we're right on the issues, as she has moved radically to the left to appeal to national liberal coalitions and activists. Senator Gillibrand has turned her back on moderates and conservatives who are needed to win. Look, she was known as Annie Oakley when she was in the House, but she's turned into Jane Fonda in the Senate. We have a great team with top national media consultants, pollsters, strategists, and fundraisers. In fact, in 2 months, we have already raised more money than the last Republican candidate for U.S. Senate raised during the entire campaign. I will raise the millions that it will take to win. And we have a winning narrative and message. Bring our tax dollars home and rebuild New York. A message that will attract voters across the state and policies that will create good paying middle-class jobs. I believe that we will be successful. But the stakes are about much more than just the U.S. Senate. For just after you vote on the U.S. Senate, you'll be voting on the important races for the House of Representatives and the state Senate. And it could, and the Assembly. And it could affect control of both of those institutions. The better we do on the ballot in the U.S. Senate, the better we do on every race that follows. We can win this race, but I can't do it alone. I must have your help and support. I am putting it all out there every day with all of the energy that I have. Please join me. As Republicans, we can and we will win this together. Thank you.
We have time to take a couple of questions? Sure. Okay, if we have a couple of questions, Shell still has a little time.
Okay, all right.
Rabbi?
Yes, oh, please, go ahead. Well, I am a lifelong Republican. You are right, I did marry a Democrat. But that only proves that I can work across the aisle. To answer your questions, that is actually a lot longer. We are putting policy up for that very reason. So I will have very detailed, answers to all of that. And I would love to have a conversation with you, afterwards. I'm a huge fan of the Second Amendment. So in terms of, and I am very much against sanctuary cities. That's sort of the short answer. Well, look, I talk about the $40 billion. The $40 billion was in 2016. In 2017, the numbers are not public yet, but Cuomo himself has said that the number is $48 billion. And now that we lost the state and local tax deduction, that figure is even going up. And I think it's an absolute travesty. That's our money. And that needs to come back. I'm actually making a list of all the projects that need money across the state. And there is no question that the subway system is an embarrassment for the greatest country in the world and the greatest city in the world to have a subway that is just not running effectively. So we've got to do a much better job on that. And as an engineer, I feel that that's got to be my number one priority. Well, I certainly would have voted for it. So absolutely. And I would vote for the wall, to answer your question. Oh, sure, go ahead. I am a Trump supporter. What issues am I most with him? I feel like I'm another business person. And I'm very much with him with the idea that we need to negotiate more. And this is the whole idea with all of these trade agreements. I've negotiated lots of agreements in my day, and they never last more than a few years without one party wanting to come back and amend them, which is fine. Because then the other party says, oh, in fact, there's something I want to change too. And what happens is things change. We all know this. And it's much better to have that opportunity. And the fact that we're setting these things in stone doesn't make any sense. And it's frankly not good for anybody. So I feel like, I'm not a career politician like Trump. And we need to shake things up, drain the swamp, and clean things up. And then the other thing that I have not touched upon is term limits. I've said this quite a bit, that I'm like, I will serve 2 terms, and that's it.
One more question.
Okay, sure. Actually, it's based on the squeaky wheel theory. So what's happening is, yes, nobody is crying for it. What actually happens in the budget, and this is the shocker, is that you have to have a list of projects. And that they simply determine it by the projects, which is why if you asked Kirsten Gillibrand, she wouldn't know that the money's not coming back. It was actually Tom DiNapoli, as the controller, who figured it out.
But
it's a list of projects.
Republicans in the South have always voted against us Even Sandy, they voted against us. It kills us here in New York when our own Republicans vote against our city.
Well,
How do we get votes when Republicans out of Alabama, Mississippi don't want to give us a nickel?
Well, we have
So how are
something,
you going to change that?
well, we have one great thing, which is we have a New Yorker in the White House. All right, and let me quickly address your first question. The first question is, and this goes back to policy. I have two policies. One, the state and local tax deduction, losing it cold turkey, was horrible. What can we do to improve things? I mean, after all, Marco Rubio was able to double the child tax credit. If we'd had a Republican senator from New York, or frankly, any of the other high state tax states, we could have gotten that number instead of doubled or tripled. And so what can we do? Number one, I will do that. And number two, we're talking about creating 529 accounts, which currently exist, that you can save for your child's education. Why can't you use those to pay your school taxes? That affects absolutely everyone, and they're high numbers. And the third thing is a deduction for rent. Right now, why is it only mortgages get to be deducted? Why couldn't we have a rent deduction as well? And that is something that will appeal to a lot of these moderate voters. And again, I am not, I'm running against one person, Kirsten Gillibrand. So it's going to be the decision as to you want to go with her. She's been in power for 9 years. What has she done for it? She's put forward 13 jobs bills. How many of them have passed? None. Or do you want somebody with new ideas, enthusiasm, who's going to, shake things up? So, thank you.
Please join me in thanking Chele Farley for coming down tonight. I understand you have another event. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chele Farley, everybody.